So next we're going to zoom forward to the second half of the book. So by this point, I finally left San Marcos and the Bliss balls behind. These delicious little balls of superfood and cacao that, like, you could trade. You could basically, if you didn't have money, you could trade in Bliss balls. You know, like it was that sort of. They were that pervasive down there. At this point, we're going to zoom forward to the second half of the story. By this point, I've had some really wild adventures. I've been given a mysterious gift. I'm now zooming around on this motorcycle to find these intentional communities. I'm finding all sorts of interesting stories in the communities that I visit while looking for the solution of how to do community perfectly. Very elusive question, as it turns out. And I'm zooming around Nicaragua on my motorcycle at this point. So that's about the context for this next part. Anyone have any questions first before we go on? A sip of water. I'm good. Are you guys enjoying this? Yeah. Okay, I really enjoyed telling you stories. All right, my friends.
From here?
No, I rented it down in Nicaragua. So I did Guatemala by like hitchhiking and crazy. They have these pickup trucks that just rattle you through the jungle, and some other like buses, and that was cool because the thing about motorcycles, it turns out, is it can be like very isolating. You don't have people to talk to. You're just like, also it's a lot of on roads that aren't great. It's a lot of concentration. It's not like a road trip, like a relaxing road trip. On a motorcycle, it's like you got to be focused like all the time, right? And so it was cool because the first half of the trip was very much like I was in all different types of groups in buses or by myself or on hitchhiking, and there's a lot of interaction. And for the second half, it was cool to get the experience of having a motorcycle because there's also plenty of perks. Like, for example, when you suddenly get like a latched onto new travel friend who you kind of don't really want to be traveling with anymore. Sometimes it can happen like where they're just also going to the place that you're going to the next day, and you're just like, oh, and then like you're on the bus and they're like, I was going to get on that bus too, and you're just like, oh geez, I want to get rid of this person. I mean, it's never usually too bad, but once in a while you just do wish that you had your space back. And the nice thing about motorcycles, you're like, oh, awesome, thanks. The nice thing about a motorcycle is you're like, all right, peace out. No room for anyone else in the back, strapping my bag to the back. And so there was a lot of freedom to the motorcycle portion too. So I was glad to have both the experiences. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay.
Cost to rent a motorcycle?
What's that?
How much does it cost to rent?
It wasn't too much. It was like for a few weeks, a few $100, like $200 or $300.
Yeah.
I think it was like $20 a day, $30 a day. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, yeah, $20 a day. And a lot of the places down there are way safer than you hear about. Honestly, I was almost wanting a little bit more run-ins with like crooked officials and like, shady characters. I was stuffing my valuables in places where I was sure they would never be found. I never got a chance to even be mugged, which is good, but also it's when you're an author, you kind of want some of those experiences,
Thanks, we can fix this for you. Right? I could have arranged it for you.
Totally. So that said, it was just a really safe, beautiful one. Like Nicaragua to drive around was safe and beautiful, and I had no problems at all. Everyone was incredibly friendly.
Did you fly into South America?
Yeah. I flew in to Guatemala and I flew out of Costa Rica, and I did the in between by over 2.5 months by various forms of travel. Yeah.
What was your favorite element of touch?
Well, apparently it was. Wait, wasn't it? Apparently it was water. Wasn't that the one where I got the erection?
Air.
Oh, was the air? Air is the one that gave me the erection. So that's obviously apparently my favorite. But honestly, the truth, I would say fire was. I feel like for me, my body needs like strong, heavy movements. Like it helps wake me up, and that's why maybe I'm a little less receptive to some of the subtle stuff, because maybe I need a little more just like, a lot of times I often need higher doses of things to like feel the full effect, so massage is no different, I guess. But we should practice more.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, okay, cool. Let's carve out some time for that. By the way, everyone, this is my girlfriend, so I can make comments like that.
Nice work into the audience, you know.
All right, cool. Well, I'm going to jump into this next one, and then I'll leave some time at the end for more questions. All right, so chapter 16. This is in the second part of the book that's called the Nicaragua part. Part 2, the Nicaragua part. Chapter 16, Grenada Nights. I don't know what it is, but there's something about Nicaragua that just makes me want to throw my good behavior out the window and get downright rambunctious. After all, when a bottle of rum costs $3 and a pack of smokes costs $1.50, it's almost like you're losing money if you don't partake. So here I was, lying on a raggedy couch, my throat scratchy from a night of drinking and smoking, and my chest hair sparkling with glitter. A couple of hours earlier, I found myself in a treehouse, the uninvited guest at a bizarre wedding, and witness to the strange tradition of penis limbo. The motorcycle ride from Ometepe to Grenada had been smooth, besides a short rainstorm and an aching meniscus from days spent scrambling around the island's volcanoes. Grenada, which sits near the northern shores of Lake Nicaragua, is known as one of the country's prettier towns and whose old colonial architecture is still largely intact. A few hours prior to my arrival, while on the ferry from Ometepe to the mainland, I struck up a conversation with an Aussie girl named Betty. She told me about a hostel in Grenada called the Oasis, where she was planning on staying, so upon rolling into town, I decided to check it out. The Oasis had been converted from a giant colonial residence into a vibrant yet low-budget backpacker destination and had a nice, relaxed atmosphere. I decided the hostel's pretty courtyards would be a good place to catch up with my journaling and communications, so I booked a dorm bed for a couple of nights. I parked El Rojo inside, along with some other motorcycles, next to a giant peeling mural of dancing ladies. After checking in, I'd been shown to my quarters, one of 4 beds in a small room. The Oasis provided a locker for my bag, a personal fan to help with the heat, and a power outlet next to my bed. Sharing the room with me was a sweet girl from California and 2 hulking German guys. I chose the lower bed in a rickety 2-level bunk which shook to the point of collapse when Fritz clambered into his upper bunk. Boarding school memories from my childhood flashed into my mind, but I was hopeful that unlike homesick 8-year-olds, grown men rarely wet their beds. So after a couple of days later, here I was sitting on the previously mentioned raggedy couch next to a communal kitchen and feeling a little worse for wear. It was late, and since I wasn't able to sleep, I sat in the courtyard recording a journal entry. The rest of the hostel was asleep, except for a small group of thickly accented, cigarette-smoking Israeli backpackers who busied themselves whipping up a large batch of hummus in the kitchen. I was poking at a tasteless tamale that I'd tried to spice up with some local hot sauce in an attempt to mask its blandness. After a while, the Israelis finished preparing their midnight snack. Like other hostels, the Oasis was packed with different people of all ages, travelers from various countries who often delighted in sharing their customs and traditions with other travelers. But not these Israelis, and not this hummus. Good night, man, one of them waved to me as the trio headed back to their room, unshared hummus in hand. I returned somewhat bitterly to my cold tamale and journal entry and set about capturing details from the day. It had all started innocently enough. After a solid sleep, I had ventured out into the breakfast area. One of the perks of the Oasis was that they provided eggs and pancakes in the morning, and the dining area was a flurry of activity. I saw Betty across the patio, sitting at a table next to a small pool and surrounded by a bunch of fun-looking characters. I loaded up a large plate and headed over. Hey everybody, eggs on me! When you act like you already know everybody, and kind of like an idiot, it can be remarkably easy to be welcomed into a group of random people. Ah, the Eggman has arrived, a young, smiley, and very attractive American guy replied. I'm Charlie. Dougie, you made it, Betty cried in an excited shrill. I sat down and smiled. One of the recurring themes of this trip seemed to be that as soon as I felt confident and solid within myself, things would start to fit together effortlessly. Traveling's an especially good time to practice going with the flow, to witness how our energy levels and external situations influence our mood, and regularly changing settings consistently offer the opportunity to practice how we act and react. Besides Betty and Charlie, the other people at the table included a group of Canadian guys, my California roommate who was named Alexis, and a Swedish girl named Helga. Stories of their previous night began to emerge, during which a karaoke escapade had ended in an orgy between the two Canadians and Helga, and I greatly admired how everyone was laughing about it over their eggs and pancakes. After breakfast, we continued to lounge around the pool, where we were joined by a mom and her 2 kids, a boy of 4 and a girl of 6. She was from Minnesota, traveling alone, and appreciated us entertaining her kids while she got to relax. In fact, we were all having so much fun that we decided to go out on a day of sightseeing together. After getting dressed, we met back up in the lobby. Charlie and I put the kids on our shoulders, and we set off, an impromptu family of 10 or so new friends, ranging from 4 to 50. We walked around the quaint cobbled streets of Grenada, visiting art galleries, climbing up the bell tower of the town's church, and zigzagging through a bustling market where we bought ice creams for the kids and beers for ourselves. An hour or so later, I broke off from the group, jumped on El Rojo, and headed out of town, along dusty roads and through farmlands, on my way towards a series of islands called Las Isletas. These numerous tiny islands had been created during a massive volcanic explosion many years earlier that had left rocky remnants scattered all around a peninsula at the north end of Lake Nicaragua. After getting a little lost when my headset led me to the incorrect destination, I eventually found a bunch of leathery skinned men loitering around a restaurant next to a small marina of motorboats. There were no other tourists, so I decided to haggle with one of them. I've been in Central America for a couple of months, and my Spanish had improved to a state where I could strike up a basic communication of numbers, humor, and mock surprise at the laughably inflated tourist prices. After some back and forth with one particular man called Diego, we settled on a price and set out on a late adventure afternoon boat tour. Las Isletas are home to all sorts of private homes, old forts, and run-down structures. One tiny island had even been made into a restaurant where I happened to meet some other people that I'd seen around the oasis. They'd been at the hostel for a few days and suggested I try to make it back in time for happy hour at 5 p.m., as it should be a pretty fun scene since it was Valentine's Day, a revelation which my hopelessly romantic self pretended to be surprised by. I made it back from the boat tour with just enough time to successfully deflect Diego's demands for additional money and to navigate safely back to the oasis for happy hour. The rum was flowing, and I soon met back up with my friends from the morning who were already good and sauced up. While grabbing around at the bar, I met a Swiss-German girl whose name, by some stroke of romantic poetry, was actually Valentina, and we hit it off and soon began scheming an evening of fun and mischief. During happy hour, I heard murmurings of a party at a place called the Treehouse and noted down some cryptic directions for how to get there. I did my best to rally the breakfast posse, but still exhausted from karaoke and the orgy the previous night, besides all once again being mostly plastered, they decided to keep it low-key. Valentina, however, was up for an adventure, so we headed out into the warm night air of Grenada. The treehouse was in a remote location, just outside of town, and accessible only to those that knew the back roads, or, as it was in our case, to those that knew of a secret shuttle that left at a certain time from a shady bar that we'd heard about at happy hour. We had a couple of drinks at the bar as we waited for the shuttle, and soon a group of about 10 gringos had gathered and were loaded up into the back of a pickup truck, which took off out of town. Valentina and I were grateful to have scored the shotgun seat next to the speeding driver as we watched the revelers in the back get their faces slapped and hats knocked off by low-hanging jungle vines. 20 minutes or so later, we were dropped at the foot of a rocky forest path. The driver pointed into the forest and said he'd be back in a few hours to pick us up. He then got back in his truck and promptly zoomed away back down the dark dirt road from which he'd come. With little other option, we set off into the forest, our initial excitement now giving way to a little more apprehension. After a muddy, jagged 15-minute climb with only sporadic solar-powered lanterns to indicate that we were on the right path, we were grateful to hear voices of merriment and soon emerged into a scene of sparkling revelry. The treehouse was made up of a series of suspended walkways, hammocks, lofted platforms, and janky structures, all rigged up and fastened to trees and anchored to rocky outcrops. When we arrived, the party was in full swing. We had no idea that we were actually crashing the wedding reception of a tall Austrian man to a starry-eyed young French woman. I looked around and my tripper sense tingled. Most of those in attendance were almost certainly on a large amount of psychedelics. To add to the already bizarre scene, everyone at the party was in drag. And so it was no surprise that upon our approach to the dance floor, we were promptly directed to a large box of various pieces of clothing. I ditched my gray jeans and black t-shirt for a tight gold miniskirt, thin blouse, and flamboyant hat. You know it's a good party when getting into drag makes you stand out less, I said to Valentina. She laughed as she pulled a glittery item out of the box. After getting a drink at the bar, a smiling fellow in a red velvet bodysuit approached me, his pupils as big as saucers. "Welcome, beautiful man, I'm Sparkles!" He grinned like a loon. Sparkles was flanked by a giggling girl, both of whom were in their early 20s and obviously high as kites. "Looks like someone hasn't been glittered yet." And that's when I noticed the sheer amount of glitter that surrounded me. It was on glowing faces, on the dance floor, on the surrounding paths, even on the trees. It was like a giant unicorn with irritable bowel syndrome had farted rainbow sprinkles over the entire party. Meanwhile, my new friend Sparkles was already heaping a glittery mound into the girl's hands. "Close your eyes," Sparkles said, and the girl squealed gleefully as she blew the entire pile into my face and exposed man chest. And then, as quickly as they'd appeared, Sparkles and his jubilant assistant moved on to their next glitter victim. After the Psytrance DJ finally took a break, a variety of non-traditional wedding traditions got underway, including a twerk shop led by a beautifully voluptuous woman whose copious butt movements reverberated throughout the entire suspended platform. This impressive act was followed by a much-anticipated round of penis limbo. One fellow, whose costume was made up of shiny sneakers, a rainbow afro, sweatbands, and a whole bunch of glitter, had tied a piece of ribbon between his penis and a bar stool, under which a line of eager contestants began to limbo. With each round, the naked man squatted a little lower as the stool wobbled and the crowd cheered. On the other side of the dance floor, I saw Fritz, my German roommate from the Oasis, looking somewhat awkward in a tight, furry vest and silver fishnets. His buddy, who I'd never actually seen sober, was propped up on the bar, wearing a form-fitting onesie and silver star-shaped sunglasses, so drunk that he was barely able to stand. After watching Penis Limbo for a little while longer, I met back up with Valentina, who was now wearing a pink leotard and a bow tie. We decided to go explore the rest of the place before witnessing the inevitable penile disaster. We were halfway across the suspension bridge that led away from the dance floor, when we heard the stool tumble and the naked man yelp in strained glee, no doubt signaling the end of the Penis Limbo tournament. The walkway led to a series of tented platforms that were full of beds. At the end of the walkway, a few metal steps led up to a platform that was perched over the cliff. Sounds of sex came from the mosquito net draped bedroom, moans emanating out into the jungle night. The whole scene at the treehouse was a puritanical nightmare. Excess and debauchery, an unabashed display of hedonism playing out in the treetops. I gotta tell you, it was pretty great. A few hours, a bottle of rum, and plenty of strange, multi-threaded conversations later, Valentina and I carefully descended the rocky path just in time to catch the last shuttle home. It started raining as we drove back towards Grenada, and I could only imagine how the scene at the treehouse was unfolding. It was one of those magical nights which had luckily concluded before daylight cast the whole mess into stark reality. Once back at the Oasis, I walked Valentina back to her dorm, where we shared a sweet and fleeting kiss. The next morning, she was leaving for Ometepe, and we both knew it was unlikely we'd ever see each other again. I was feeling poetically lyrical from the booze, so I settled down in the courtyard to collect my thoughts while lamenting this awful tamale. I marveled at how my Grenada experience was so far removed from the high-vibe, hippie-conscious community of Lake Atitlan. It was like all the yoga, meditation, healthy food, and cacao ceremonies had been replaced with rum, cigarettes, and illicit drug use. Instead of ecstatic dance in the clouds, there was now acid weddings in the jungles. I considered how my external environment had such a powerful influence on my behavior. It felt like just when I got closest to clarity, to deep connection with myself and others, I would hit this let's throw it all out the window button and revert to mindless, debaucherous behaviors, which would invariably leave me feeling numb and energetically depleted, but with a great story. This was an old pattern. But what's wrong with a little partying now and then? I'd tell myself. Of course, within a relatively short span of time, my balance inevitably tipped from the higher vibe activities towards excessive food, sex, alcohol, and pretty much any other vice I could find. Once the party was really rolling, I would typically get into an increasingly celebratory mood until before you know it, I'm in drag at a psychedelic wedding watching penis limbo. I finished up my journal entry, pushed the remnants of the tamale away, and pulled my last cigarette from the pack. How much of this celebration, how much of this travel and quest for peak experiences is actually just another form of escape? Maybe it was time to rein it in a little bit. My plan was to ride up to Leon in a couple of days, where I had heard there was a variety of volcano expeditions, and if I was going to haul a heavy backpack up and down a mountain, then I better have a few days of healthy eating. And no more smoking or drinking for a while. Jeez. I took a long final drag from the cigarette and crumpled the box. Tomorrow, after the predestined eggs and pancakes, I would say goodbye to my mischievous friends and head to a place to the north of Grenada called Hostel Paradiso, which lay on the edge of the Apoyo Lagoon. From the photos, it looked calm and serene, far away from the big city distractions. Surely there I would find the rest and relaxation I needed. Well, it turns out I was very wrong about that, and the temptations of Nicaragua were just getting started. So that's what I had for you guys tonight. Did you enjoy that?
Yeah.
And
More, Dad, more.
I'm really excited. What do you say? I'm really excited to share it with you and to announce that, I have some little handouts up there next to where the chocolates were. So if you'd like to pick up a pre-release copy, selling them with the code that's on those flyers for $20. I'm also offering a bunch of adventures around Southern Oregon in my magical, colorful VW van. I can plan anything from a day adventure. I also do this for parents. If in case anyone has their parents come into town, we could go on a fun adventure. I'm really good at planning awesome times and also doing weekend things. So in general, even I would just be super interested in talking to people that lead adventures in the local area and seeing fun ways to collaborate. And if anyone signs up for my things, ways to collaborate on fun stuff. So you can find all of that at my website, my shiny website, which is DougieLux.com. And again, thank you so much. Thank you guys.